Our next item is the Student Behavior Comprehensive Framework. Dr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Boswell. Thank you. We're going to wait till the slides are loaded here just a second, then we'll begin. Thank you. All right. Well, we're here tonight to address one of the board's goals. As you know, last July you set 2 goals for the system, one of which was the development of a comprehensive behavior framework that would include features of prevention, accountability, and restorative practices. Before we go into some of the highlights of our district's new behavior framework, I'd like to put this work in context, both in terms of what else happened this year and what led up to it. So we'll start with that. You'll remember last fall, Dr. Gosman identified 4 areas of focus for the school district, one of which was positive behavior supports. Out of that, Ryan Zabava, the Director of Student Services, formed a district-wide committee that looked at that issue and gave Dr. Gosman a report and some recommendations on what we could do to support positive behavior. Those recommendations included professional learning for building leaders around restorative practices, that we have consistent and more restrictive cell phone practices. And I do want to thank Ryan for his work on this. That work had really started prior to the transition, and he did a lot of work with principals as well, both at the middle and high school level. Cameras are being installed, and was recommended to be installed at middle schools, and that we invest in other measures to secure a more positive learning environment, such as electronic hall passes, vape mitigation. So those were recommendations that came out of the committee that Ryan Zabava formed in support of Dr. Gosman's transition plan. We also did this work in the context of All Means All. You'll remember that that has as one of its features positive behavior and the reduction of suspensions and the disparities in suspensions. So what did we work on this year in addition to developing the framework itself? Well, we did implement cell phone practices, common cell phone practices across the district at both the middle level and the high school level. Just as a reminder, at the middle level, it essentially means cell phones are not in use at all during the school day. At the high school level, it means they're not in use during the instructional time. We did implement a digital hall pass system at the high school level, and I certainly want to thank Computing Services, Christy Peters, as well as Jess Fries, the Director of Secondary Education, for all of their work in implementing that digital hall pass. We do have a vape detection pilot in progress at East High. You've received some of the data related to that. Second semester, we started a pilot of the e-hall pass system in 2 of our middle schools. Cameras are being installed in the middle schools. I believe operations is about halfway, 60% through that process. And finally, all building leadership as well as teachers have received professional learning this year in restorative practices. Now, our purpose tonight is to highlight some of the main features of the new district-wide pre-K-12 behavior framework. I want to emphasize that this framework had significant input from a variety of audiences. I held listening sessions at about half of our school buildings, heard from 500 to 600 teachers across the district. The prompt was simple. What could the district do to support a better learning environment for you in your classroom and in the building? We'll talk about some of the themes that came out of that. We formed a group in conjunction with LEA. Deb Rasmussen is here. I want to thank her and LEA's participation in this process. We received regular input from building administrators. Carmen Pedroza, who I'll introduce here in a second, held focus groups with students. So I can't emphasize enough, we went out and asked students what they think would make a difference in having a more positive learning environment in their classrooms and their schools. So I want to thank Carmen for going out and doing that. In the next couple of weeks, we'll gather feedback from Dr. Gosman's community advisory group, and also our community's curriculum council. And then Carmen did a lot of work to review what we've done historically, what other districts do, the latest research and practices with respect to effective positive behavior supports. Here are some of the themes that emerged from all of that input that we gathered. And the first one is consistency. If there's anything I heard from teachers, it was this. We need to be consistent within our building and between buildings with respect to how we prevent unwanted behaviors and how we respond when we have an unwanted behavior. Teachers were very firm about their desire for there to be accountability or consequences for inappropriate behavior. Interestingly enough, so were the students. The students just want that accountability to be fair, consistently implemented, and appropriate for the unwanted behavior. So teachers and students are actually on the same page overall with respect to that. Students and teachers alike want explicit expectations, and teachers would like time to teach those expectations, particularly at the start of a school year. Teachers would like more support. I'll be honest, they would like more behavioral interventionists in their building. They would like more school psychologists. They would like more therapists. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that they would like a lot more staff. But we've looked at ways we can provide better support to teachers, especially new teachers who don't have the strategies and tools to address unwanted behavior in the classroom. And finally, teachers want better communication. When a student is removed from the classroom or receives some sort of consequence, they want to make sure that they learn what happened to that student before that student returns to their classroom. So these are some of the themes we've attempted to address in the new behavior framework. All right, so that brings us to the behavior framework itself. And in a second, I'm going to turn this over to Carmen Pedroza. Carmen is a student services supervisor who's responsible for the district's multi-tiered system of support for behavior. And I can't thank her enough for her work in developing this framework. She is the primary architect of what you're looking at. Now, she didn't do it alone. I've already talked about all the input and feedback we received from a variety of audiences, but she also has a team in student services I want to recognize. That, of course, includes Ryan Zabava, the Director of Student Services, Mike Wren, Sarah Wright, Nancy Wiebelhaus, Megan Chapman, Sarah Jones, and Clay Holman. All of these individuals worked to develop the framework that's before you tonight. And so I want to publicly thank Carmen and her team for putting this together. And so now Carmen's going to share some of the highlights of the framework with you, and then I'll come back and talk about our next steps as we work to implement the framework.
Thank you, Matt. So as Matt had said, over the course of the next few slides, we're going to talk about kind of the ins and outs as much as we can about the framework in this limited time. But I want to start with really what is the purpose of the actual framework. We had a board goal to meet, and so this is really what the purpose within the framework is. First of all, we need to have a common understanding of foundational understanding of principles of behavior. In order to prevent behavior, in order to address behavior and respond to behavior, we have to understand what behavior is and what it's communicating to us. We need to provide a structure and a restorative approach to responding to behavior when that happens. Prevention, accountability, and restorative practices, that comes through in not only the response piece, but also the prevention piece. We want to equip our educators with those evidence-based strategies. We don't want to just make up something. We want to make sure that it's evidence-based. And we want to provide a matrix for accountability, going back to those themes that Matt had already mentioned with consistency and communication. That comes through via the matrix. And then resources and practical tools. So when we talk about evidence-based strategies, we want to provide those tools that help support our teachers to do those strategies. With the PAR framework, we have prevention, accountability, and restorative practices. What really grounds this work is a common understanding of what that means in Lincoln Public Schools. So when we think about prevention, we think about intentional planning. intentional planning around building relationships, around clear and explicit expectations, routines, utilizing that mindset of not only are we going to have high expectations, but we're going to have high support so that students can meet those expectations. With accountability, we want that to be transparent. We want that to be consistent. And we want it to be a combination of not only appropriate consequences and accountability, but we want it to be an avenue to reteach missing skills and to communicate with parents and teachers and staff alike, as well as students, what the next steps for accountability are. In terms of restorative practices, it's really a collection of processes that focus not only on prevention, but accountability. I'm going to talk about and reference later on of how it really is that thread that weaves both prevention and accountability together. In addition to our components that really make up our framework, we have 10 tenets that support the work as well. So these include building relationships. They include professional learning on the framework. It also includes tiers of support, supports for accountability, as well as continuous improvement and opportunities to give feedback on what the framework includes. When we think about prevention, again, we can all have our common understanding and definitions of what that means. But within our realm of prevention, we want to consistently talk about building relationships. Students, when they feel most comfortable in their environment, when they have good relationships with their teachers, those are typically the opportunities where they learn best. We want to continue to have expectations and routines, and we want to communicate those to teachers and to students. I heard, Matt had mentioned I had met with students. I heard directly from students that said, yes, I need expectations. Yes, you need to teach me those regularly. And yes, sometimes you need to teach me those every single day. Now, as an adult, we kind of sometimes think that that's excessive. But hearing that directly from students that yes, sometimes you have to teach me those things every single day really resonated, and it was something that I wanted to share with you all. Continuing on, in terms of prevention, we need to continue to teach those pro-social skills. When we think of pro-social skills, us as adults use those every single day. Those are those skills such as communication, conflict resolution, asking for help when we need it. Those are things that our kids and students need to continue to have reinforcement with as well. When we think about accountability, going back to, again, those themes that Dr. Larson had mentioned, it is those consistent responses. This is just a tool that helps us be more consistent in our decision making. Within the accountability matrix, which you will have a chance to preview here in a little bit, and I'll highlight some key features. Again, it supports that consistency within our building and between buildings, because sometimes we have mobility, and we want to make sure that a kid that might start at Dawes Middle School and goes to Scott Middle School, that they have the same level playing field and same common understanding and expectations, no matter what school that they're at. Before you, you'll see just a snapshot without much more than the snapshot. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out kind of those key features so that we can kind of grapple with that a little bit. But ultimately, this is just that tool that helps us be more consistent. We're going to be field testing it in the 24-25 school year so that we can continue to make improvements and make adjustments as necessary, getting feedback from our administrators, what's working, what's not. So when we look at the accountability matrix, some of the key features that I want to highlight are on the left-hand side right away is the levels of behavior. So what we know about behavior is it's not black and white, so we need to have some type of system that helps us understand. Sometimes we have bigger behaviors and sometimes we have smaller behaviors. When we have those smaller behaviors that are manageable in the classroom, we're going to provide tools for our teachers to manage those. If the behavior continues, or there's a bigger type of disruption, or it's a bigger type of behavior, then we have steps that we involve our administrators. Sometimes we have to involve student services to help us make decisions. The matrix also includes accountability and consequences. This helps specify what our next steps will be when it comes to accountability and consequences. And that's going to be based on the type of level and the type of behavior that's occurred. Thinking through responsibilities. We all have a responsibility when it comes time to the matrix. Students have their responsibility because they engaged in the behavior. As a student, I'm responsible for talking with my teacher about what happened. I'm responsible for making up my missed work. I'm responsible for, talking with my parents about what my mishap was. When I think about teachers and staff, if the behavior happened in the classroom, I'm going to call the parents. I'm going to talk with the student. So nothing new of what we would currently expect of teachers. That's going to remain the same. In terms of administrators, as the behavior increases, more responsibility will be with the teachers. We're going to have different responses. Communication loop, referencing back to those emerging themes. Teachers want to know what's happening. They want to know what the response was. We're going to provide an opportunity for schools to establish what that school-specific system will be. That re-entry. If students leave the classroom, we want to plan for how they're going to come back to the learning environment. We want them in the learning environment. We're just going to create a plan that exemplifies what will be included in that plan. And then activities, referencing back to our accountability definition. There's missing skills. We want to provide opportunities for students to work on those missing skills. So when you holistically look at the matrix, you might not pull all of these things out, but here is just kind of a nuts and bolts and key features of the matrix. And then lastly, in the PAR framework, the last one is restorative. Again, that is really that common thread that weaves together prevention and accountability. It helps us build relationships, create that supporting environment, improve our school climate. It also provides opportunity for us to address harm, respond, encourage accountability and responsibility. And ultimately, it's aligned with our trauma-informed care. For our students who have experienced trauma or have witnessed trauma, this helps us and our teachers and our staff fully understand when we utilize restorative practices, we are engaging in trauma-informed care.
Thank you, Carmen. So how are we going to implement this? And I'd like to ask you for a platoon of behavior coaches who would help us support teachers and buildings, but I also realize that's unrealistic with respect to the budget and staff availability. So I want to assure you we can implement this without additional cost. We've already begun that process. Carmen has led multiple sessions with building leadership. They've gone through scenarios. They practiced the accountability matrix. They're getting an opportunity to ask their questions and get responses to them. During the fourth quarter, every teacher in this school district will get an overview of the entire comprehensive framework for behavior. Significant time in the summer school improvement workshop will be devoted to addressing the behavior framework. During the first week of August, when teachers come back, significant time will again be spent on the behavior framework. We plan, as we've had this year, quarterly professional learning sessions after school during regular school meetings, so it's not an add-on, on the behavior framework. And of course, we'll meet regularly with administrators for feedback. So that is our plan to get this implemented. Now, I want to stress that this is a live document in the sense that we'll constantly be improving it as we move forward. So we'll make adjustments throughout all of next year. So to look at the major behavior initiatives for next school year, one, it's the implementation of this behavior framework. We will expand the digital hall pass to middle schools. Vape detection will be installed at all high schools as operations is able to get that done. And we will have dedicated time at the elementary level during the first 2 weeks of school and at quarter and semester breaks to explicitly teach expectations, routines, and procedures. I want to thank Dr. Takako Olson and the curriculum department for working to make this time available during the beginning of the school year. Remember, that was one of the themes we heard from teachers. We need time to teach this. And we don't want to start just with math and reading on day one and not have the time to build those relationships, establish expectations, reinforce them at the beginning of the year. So we've made that available. So in summary, the behavior framework is balanced and it's comprehensive. In the last decade, we have at times as a school district emphasized prevention more than some other aspects. We've emphasized restorative practice more than other aspects. We're now saying all three are important. They support, work together to have that positive teaching and learning environment. We'll have consistent expectations through this framework, and we'll have consistent responses to unwanted behavior. So I want to emphasize our first goal is to prevent it, but if we encounter an unwanted behavior, we want to make sure that everyone's responding in the same way. That helps address equity, because it takes out the fact that some groups of students or in some buildings may be treated differently with respect to consequences, because now there's a common expectation for how we respond to that. We aim to improve communication and transparency through the framework. We'll provide professional learning. We'll constantly improve it. And finally, something we haven't mentioned is last year the unicameral passed a law with respect to student discipline in schools called the Nebraska State Discipline Act. And every school district by July 1 of 2025 is going to be required to have a comprehensive behavior framework. We're essentially a year ahead of that state requirement. So the work had to be done, but we're doing the work because it's the right thing to do. Because we've heard over and over again, as you have, from community members and teachers and others, that we need to address this. Before we address questions, one final comment, so I didn't forget what you wanted me to say. I want to talk a little bit about how long this is going to take. This is a great document. I'm proud of the work that Carmen and others have done, proud of all the contributions our staff members and students have made to its development. It's not perfect, but what I can assure you of is that next year, Mike Gelati and Ryan Zabava and Carmen Pedroza and all our building leaders and teachers will work to improve it day after day after day. It's a great start to improving our teaching and learning environment in schools. So I hope everybody gives the system time for this to have an impact. Anytime we implement something new, it takes time for everybody to learn it, and we have to make adjustments. In that sense, it's no different than implementing a new reading program or a new math program. And we have to remember that the increased behaviors we see are just a reflection of society. School's a subset of society at large. And when our students see adults, resolve their conflict through argument and physical fights, we shouldn't be surprised that they sometimes respond in that way. When our students see leaders in the world, bully one another and call each other names and marginalize groups of people, we shouldn't be surprised that we see that behavior reflected in our schools. So we want schools to be a safe haven from all of that. And we think this behavior framework's a good start. And we think ultimately, right, if we improve student behavior in schools, it'll have an impact on society at large. But again, not overnight. I was challenged to put a number on it, so I'm going to say 3 to 5 years. We should see some significant impact. And I think we can do that because we've seen an impact this year from e-hall pass, from cell phone practices. We've seen a positive change. And I think this is just another step in the district's work to ensure that positive learning environment, both for teachers, students, parents, and the community at large. And with that, we'll do our best to respond to questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you. This is very impressive work. Board members, any questions or discussion? Mrs. Danig.
Thank you, President Boswell. I have a couple. I'm going to start with, We always seem to be a little ahead of the curve. I like that our district is always ahead of the curve. In fact, on television this morning, I think I sent it to Ryan, an author had a book called The Anxious Generation, and he talked about taking cell phones away from kids, and you shouldn't give them to them before high school. They should only have a flip phone. And I laugh because my husband has a flip phone. So as I was looking through the books, it was the consistent expectations, and kids need to play, and what caused all of this and the anxieties among kids. And I made myself read the whole document, which was good for me because I'm one of those moms that had consequences for my kids, and if you did something wrong and you did it a second time, it doubled, and then it tripled, and then it quadrupled. And sometimes if you got grounded, you might have to be home before you left. So there were things like that. I read a lot of that in this book. This material. What I didn't see, and I know it's in here, but it's not really exemplified, is what happens to the child who's on the receiving end of the inappropriate behavior. It's not always a teacher. Sometimes it's student to student. And when that happens, how do we rebuild that trust that that child, that student feels safe again in our buildings? What are the supports in place? What do we need to add to that? Because I think that's the other side of this, that we do need to add that piece.
That's a great question. And so that's a big piece of what restorative practices are all about. It's repairing harm when harm has been done. So that's a significant component of what we're doing and have been emphasizing for the last couple of years, and will continue to emphasize and provide professional learning on. So that's one aspect. Let me take another specific example, maybe a student who's been a victim of bullying. It's important to remember that the school district is a partner with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a program that I believe is referred to as the Targeted Bully Information Program, which has a specific component that focuses on the victim and addresses that. Students who may have experienced trauma, Carmen addressed how restorative practices do address that, but we would also connect students with other supports as appropriate and necessary. That might be a school counselor, that might be a social worker, that might be a school psychologist. We're constantly reaching out to support students so that they feel safe in the learning environment and can continue to be successful.
Does that include opportunities to move them to a different learning environment, either the person on the receiving end or the person on the giving end?
Yes, we do at times reassign students to other buildings for their own safety or the safety of others. And that happens both with an offender or a victim may choose to move to another building. So that does happen.
And then will we do follow-up or feedback as this moves on for the changes? Because there's a lot of information in here. And as I'm thinking of K through 12, it took 12 years to learn it, and this looks like it's 12 years of learning that you put in one little book that they're going to get 2 meetings to have instruction on. So a feedback network for staff and for students and what they see and learn from.
Absolutely. I mean, and there are more than 2 meetings because we've got school improvement, we've got this fourth quarter, we've got each quarterly professional learning session next year, we have the beginning of the school year, multiple opportunities. But one of the purposes of all of that is to make adjustments to this framework. We know it's not perfect as we start, but we'll continue to make adjustments day after day with feedback from building leadership, teachers. We'll hear from parents. We can do focus groups with students again to get their feedback and make the appropriate adjustments so that we constantly get better.
And last but not least, I'm really proud of this district. I went to Lincoln Public Schools. All of my children graduated from Lincoln Public Schools, and I have a lot of grandchildren in Lincoln Public Schools. One of the great parts of pride is we are ahead of the curve. So I like that we're attacking an issue and making kids feel like this is their school, their home, their neighborhood. I appreciate all the work that you've done, and I appreciate that this board made this a board goal with the superintendent and with the district as a whole. We never do anything in isolation. One person can't do anything. It has to be a collaborative process, collaborative practice, and working with each and every student. So I just want to give a big shout out to the hundreds of people that put in their information and to all of you that worked really hard to put this together, and say thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Rauner, then Ms. Mungard.
Yeah, my first reaction when I saw this was, man, somebody put a lot of time and thought into this thing. And then I was going to ask a little about inflammation, but you already talked about that, so I guess Mike's got his work cut out for him for a few years now. One thing I was going to ask you about, there's a specific comments about, look, we talk a lot of this, so far we've talked about is more in the older kids, but you've talked specifically about kids and even down to pre-K, and I was taught that, if you don't have kids with the program by the time they're 3 or 4, you're going to be catching up the rest of your life. So are these examples for the pre-K to kindergarten?
Absolutely. We work closely with Kara Lucas-Rick, and there is an entire section devoted to pre-K. It's a link in this document, but obviously preschool children are young, and you have to have specific developmentally appropriate strategies and approaches, but that is a piece of this framework, which is why I refer to it as the pre-K through 12 Comprehensive District Behavior Framework.
Ms. Mungard, then Mr. Mayhew, then Mr. Srivastava.
So thank you very much for this. This is very, when we meet for our retreats and we come up with this is a direction we want to go, it always astounds me the response of the staff, that it takes it, of course we are not the professionals here, it takes it so beyond it. And in some ways this is a program where we're trying to teach our kids to be decent humans in a relatively indecent world at this point in time, and also helping our teachers to be decent people as they do that. So thank you very much for all that work, and I look forward to us pushing this forward. I'm very much wanting us to gather data as we do this, for as you said, it is an effort to work on equity, but as we know, sometimes that's very hard. We have a lot of things based deep inside us, so how that works out, and I know that you will do that, and that we will respond once we get that data. My question comes back to, and I think I asked this before, but where is the parent aspect in this plan?
Yeah, it's a key piece. If you think back to the accountability matrix that Carmen displayed up there, there was an entire column of who's responsible to contact and work with the parent and that communication loop. So the parents, each and every parent is a partner with us in this process, and eventually pieces of this will go up on our website for the purpose of us being transparent so that everybody can see what our expectations are and what they can expect a response to be to an unwanted behavior. We're not going to put that up right away because it is in field test form, and we'll make adjustments. And so as people implement it, we want to work those things out. But our intention is to be completely transparent about this entire process. We're planning a communication to parents at the start of the school year. If you think back to the start of this school year, we had a communication to parents about cell phones, and we had a communication to parents about e-hall pass. So something similar, analogous to that with respect to the behavior framework will take place as the new school year approaches.
And as a parent, I know that you talked about needing to teach and teach again and teach again. And as a parent, I ask that you do that the same with us. I mean, my son has had a Chromebook for 6 years, and I still don't know how to access things on it, which is very frustrating to me as a parent, but it's, again, needing to go back and being taught and taught again. So I encourage that to be another part of the field testing, is how are our parents understanding also the process and what they can expect and where they need to go if they have an issue. Because it's the worst feeling in the world when your child has an issue and you don't know what to do. So on that level, thank you very, very much for the work and getting us started. I hope we don't turn par into a verb, that the kids get parred. As anybody who's been around long enough know that kids got bisted. It was a word. It became a verb. Kids knew, did you get bisted today? And some of you are looking at me like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, if you've been around long enough, BIST was one of our responses. And there's a process. So I hope that PAR does not become a verb because it becomes such an active, growing program that it's a response.
We'll keep it an acronym.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayhew, then Mr. Srivastava.
First, fantastic work, guys. Matt, Carmen, and to your staffs. This is a lot of very impressive work, and I feel very supportive of it. I appreciate that Annie mentioned the data collection. That stood out to me as well. The idea that we're collecting this data, and then this is something I feel that we've always been really good at. We collect good data, analyze it, and then learn from our experiences and make adjustments going forward. I think that's a particular strength of the district, and I appreciate that. I asked this question at the committee meeting, and so I wanted to ask it again tonight so that everyone could hear the answer. But I realized that part of what we're talking about is consequences for behavior. Through the lens of our All Means All plan, how do we reconcile this with that and the idea of disproportionate consequences for our children of color?
Well, one of the ways that disproportionate responses creep into the system is when you're not consistent. And then people at individual sites are making individual decisions. And then their implicit bias can result in a different outcome for different students. So one of the ways you address equity, both in terms of a curriculum implementation or your response to unwanted behavior, is to be consistent and have consistent expectations so that, and consistent responses, expected responses, so that that sort of individual, perhaps implicitly bias-driven response is taken out of the system. Will it be perfect? No. But it is a step in the right direction. And we've worked with Brittany Volkovac on that issue. She's supportive of this approach, and that consistency will help address the equity issue.
Thanks again. Really good work.
Mr. Srivastava.
Yeah, thank you. Just like everybody else, I also want to commend the outstanding work you all have done in coming up with this. It's very well thought out, and I really liked hearing that it's going to be an evolving document. So as we learn more, we'll keep making it better. One other thing I would like to point out is that since we have tremendous school choice in Lincoln, it's very common for students to move from one school to another, and this is going to be so helpful to make sure that the students and the teachers and the parents have very consistent expectations, and they know what would be the result of certain actions. So this is going to be very helpful in making sure that, the expectations are clear. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Mrs. Danik.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So we do everything pretty holistically in our district. And the one thing I didn't hear was before and after school programming with CLCs, and I don't want to leave them out because that support carries through. It's kind of seamless from the morning to the afternoon. Will there be opportunities to help our CLC staffs be introduced to these concepts and use them as well?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a long list of different programs, groups, and individuals that we also need to make aware of this program. Bus drivers, bus paras. Well, part of being consistent is make sure everybody's using the same language and is being consistent. CLC programming, one of the great things is Nola's a part of the instructional director group, so she's been aware of this development all the way along and all of the professional learning sessions we've had this year. So that's on the list of an entity, an organization that we need to work with and inform so that, as you put it, from the minute they arrive at school to the minute they leave, everything is consistent.
And I'm going to make an assumption that that means if you're going to a play or an athletic event, we're going to use the same basic structure of behave, even though school's out of session, you're in school, this is how you act.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Thank you.
Thank you.